When my son picked up the phone on his birthday, he didn't bother with a greeting. No hello, no warmth, just a single sentence delivered so flat and sharp it might as well have been a blade. "We don't celebrate with you anymore." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My hand went numb around the phone, and the sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter seemed to freeze in place. 51 years I've been his mother, 51, and yet there I stood, blindsided by the realization that my place in his life had quietly evaporated. I didn't ask why. Didn't plead. Didn't even breathe properly. I just whispered, "All right," hung up, and placed the phone on the table with the same care you'd give a fragile heirloom. Then I sat down at the old wooden table, the one that once held paper plates, party hats, and homemade cakes, and let the silence swallow me whole. Across from me was the chair where a younger Wesley used to kneel cross-legged, declaring it was his birthday throne. I saw him there, 6 years old, cheeks streaked with frosting, laughter bubbling out of him like a misfired soda can. He used to lean against me when he was tired. He used to reach for my hand without hesitation. I remembered every bit of him. I just hadn't realized how much of me he had forgotten. I boiled water for tea I didn't need, watching the rising steam curl upward like a white flag I didn't want to wave. My hands trembled, not from rage, not even from heartbreak, but from something deeper, a cold crystalline understanding I had been avoiding for too long. They don't see me anymore. Not really. Wesley hasn't come over without wanting something in at least a decade. His needs always arrived dressed in urgency. "Mom, can you co-sign this?" "Mom, we just need to stay a few weeks." "Mom, could you cover this bill until payday?" And every time, I said yes, thinking I was pouring love into the cracks of our family. I thought being useful meant I still mattered. Thought service was the language of affection. But usefulness isn't love. It's a rental agreement. And apparently, my lease was up. The house feels larger these days. Too large. Thelma used to bring the kids by, claiming they needed grandma time. That ended 3 years ago. Life got hectic, she'd said. They were juggling too much. I understood. Truly. But it turns out too busy becomes permanent when excuses replace effort. Being told I was no longer welcome at my own son's birthday wasn't a clean break. It was simply the first time they said aloud what their actions had been whispering for years. I sat there until the tea went cold. The shadows crept across the linoleum like slow-moving ink, and I finally stood, opening the drawer where I keep old birthday cards. I flipped through them, the crooked hearts, the crayon galaxies, the lopsided signatures. One card, written with fierce 6-year-old sincerity, declared, "Mom, you're braver than a dragon." I had once told him dragons protect treasure. He thought comparing me to one was an honor. Maybe it was. As I tucked the old cards away, I glanced at the folder holding my property documents. Over the years they'd hinted, gently at first, then not so gently, that my affairs needed simplifying. They spoke of practicality, of safety, of transferring the house before something happens. Back then, I nodded politely. But not anymore. If I'm no longer worth a seat at their table, then I'm no longer handing them the table. That night, sleep stayed far from me. I sat beneath the slow rise of the moon, letting the quiet press against my ribs. Being erased by the people you built your life around isn't loud. It's a gradual dimming, a soft fade out you don't notice until the room is dark. I didn't cry. Instead, I made a promise to myself, quiet, firm, unshakable. No more silence. No more begging for recognition. No more waiting for invitations that will never come. I have nothing left to lose. And that kind of freedom is the most terrifying, powerful thing I've ever held. Wesley's birthdays used to be productions, little festivals I stitched together out of love and scraps of imagination. A month beforehand, I would start pulling out recipes, saving coins, and jotting down ideas in the margins of old grocery lists. He adored themes. 1 year pirates, the next astronauts, then cowboys, then superheroes. Whatever his young mind latched onto, I found a way to bring to life. I remember one year, his 8th, when money was so tight it squeaked. George had just lost his job at the mill, and we were rationing groceries like it was a game. But still, I stayed up nights making papier-mâché planets and tinfoil stars. I hung them from the ceiling with fishing wire, and our living room looked like a tiny solar system suspended in hope. Wesley's face lit up like he'd swallowed the sun. When he hugged me, He nearly knocked me off my feet. "You're the best mom in the universe," he'd said, mouth full of cake and conviction. Sometimes I wonder where that boy went, whether he's still somewhere inside the man who now calls me only when his bank account looks sickly. The last birthday I ever hosted for him was his 40th. He didn't ask for anything, but I prepared a small dinner anyway. Invited a few friends. Made his favorite stew. Bought a handful of balloons, much to Thelma's disapproval. She whispered in the kitchen, "He's a grown man, Joan. He doesn't need all this fuss." But he smiled that night. Kissed my cheek before leaving. Said, "Thanks, Mom. You didn't have to." "I know," I'd replied, and I had meant it. That was 11 years ago. Since then, my house became less of a home and more of a pit stop. A place where they collected mail, borrowed tools, asked for money, stored overflow boxes, or dropped children they didn't want to bring to appointments. That afternoon, the same one when Wesley informed me I was no longer welcome at celebrations, I pulled out my ledger. Not out of bitterness, but out of a need to anchor myself in truth. It was nothing fancy, just a spiral notebook with faded flowers on the cover. I'd been keeping track of every financial favor for years, not expecting repayment, but wanting proof that I existed in ways they conveniently forgot. Loan for car repairs, $2,000. Temporary housing assistance, $5,000. College deposit for Mia, $3,500. Thelma's dental procedure, $100. Last-minute vacation emergency, $1,800. Countless small transfers I never recorded. Over $30,000 in total. 15 years of quiet giving. Not one thank you card. Not one offer to return even a portion. Always framed as temporary. Always framed as necessary. I closed the notebook gently, not in anger, but in recognition. The next day, I walked into the bank. The lobby was cold and crisp, as if the air itself were trying to keep people alert. I approached the counter where a teller named Brenna, a kind woman with soft eyes, greeted me. "I'd like to stop the automatic transfers," I told her. She blinked. "All of them? Including the ones scheduled for your son?" "Yes." Her fingers clattered across the keyboard. "I can do that. Would you also like to update your account password?" As a matter of fact, I would. When I left, my steps felt steadier. A curious, unfamiliar sensation filled me, not triumph, not relief, but something cleaner. Something like reclaiming my spine. That evening, the phone rang. Thelma's name flashed across the screen. I answered. "There's an issue with the transfer this month," she said, skipping niceties. "Wes said nothing came through." "That's correct," I replied. A pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is precisely how it needs to be," I said. "I've decided to take a break from financing grown adults." The silence on her end thickened. "Is this about the birthday thing?" "No, Pimelit. It's about boundaries." "You're being dramatic," she snapped, irritation seeping through her polished voice. "You know we appreciate everything you do." "You appreciate my money," I said softly, "not my presence." And before she could twist my words or rearrange the truth into something more comfortable, I hung up. Standing at the window afterward, I watched the porch light hum to life. Across the street, the Wilkins family was eating dinner together. Laughter spilled through their open window, warm, familiar, effortless. I used to think my family sounded like that. But some dinners go cold long before anyone notices the silence. The next morning, I retrieved the folder labeled Property and Essentials. Inside were documents George and I had updated over the years, the deed, insurance papers, and notes we scribbled about what to do if something happened. Wesley and Thelma had hinted for years that I should transfer the house early, for ease, for safety, for future planning. Funny how future planning always seemed to revolve around their convenience. I placed the folder on the table, took a pen, and wrote a single sentence. "This home is not negotiable. Not now, not ever." I slipped that note into the deed. And then I called our old attorney, Andrew Morrison. A smart, steady man who'd helped with George's will. He didn't ask for details, just offered an appointment the next morning at 10. For the first time in months, maybe years, I slept without feeling like I owed someone something. I rose early the next morning, feeling oddly steady, as if the ground beneath me had stopped shifting for the first time in a long while. I put on my navy cardigan, the one with the little pearl buttons George always liked, and walked the 3 blocks to Andrew Morrison's law office. Andrew greeted me with a warm handshake. He was younger than I remembered. Maybe that's just what happens when you grow older, everyone else appears fresher. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, "what can I help you with today?" I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and said it plainly, "I want to revise my trust. And I want to ensure no one can claim the house or its equity while I'm alive." His eyebrows didn't lift. He didn't give me the soft, patronizing voice some professionals use with elderly clients. Just nodded and clicked his pen. "A life estate clause would accomplish that. You retain full rights to live here and control the property until your passing. After that, it transfers to whoever you designate." "And I'd like to change that designation," I said. "Of course. To whom?" I thought of Reed, his quiet, steady presence, the way he actually listened to me instead of waiting for his turn to speak. I pictured him sitting at my table last Christmas, eyes soft and attentive as I retold an old story about George. He didn't ask for anything. Didn't suggest anything. Just listened. "My grandson," I said. "Reed. The house goes to him." Andrew wrote the name down without hesitation. "And the accounts," I added. "I want them locked. No access, no transfers, unless I personally authorize it." "Understood," he said. "We'll make that explicit." Before I left, I added one more thing. If my son or his wife try to contest anything, remind them that I wasn't gone when they started treating me like I already was. Andrew paused, then nodded. "I'll make sure your wishes are protected." When I stepped outside, the air smelled faintly of autumn, with smoke and leaves. I stopped at a bakery and bought a cherry tart. I hadn't tasted one in years. George loved them. Said they were too sweet and too messy, then proceeded to eat 2 in one sitting. I sat on a bench, eating slowly, letting myself enjoy something for no reason other than I wanted to. That alone felt revolutionary. That evening, Wesley called. I knew at the moment the phone buzzed. His voice was taut, carefully controlled like someone trying to carry a glass of water across a shaky floor. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." "I figured you'd call," I replied, folding laundry. "A towel. 2 pillowcases. A cardigan I'd thought about giving to Thelma but now decided I might keep." "The bank notified me," Wesley said. "And Andrew too. You changed everything." "To be precise," I said, "I changed what was mine to change." "You froze the transfers without even asking us." "To you," I corrected. "There is no us when it comes to my accounts." He exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said, "this is overdue." Silence buzzed between us, static, fractured, brittle. "Are you punishing us?" he asked. "I'm setting boundaries," I said gently. "You just don't like them." "I don't understand why you're acting like this." I folded another towel slowly, smoothing out its corners. "Wesley, you stopped treating me like a participant in your life. I've been a pocketbook and an emergency switchboard. But a mother? No. Not for a very long time." "That's not fair," he muttered. "Neither is excluding me from your birthday," I said. "You didn't want me there. Say it." He didn't. He couldn't. "It wasn't that kind of dinner," he mumbled. "It was just friends." It always starts with just. Just busy. Just complicated. Just inconvenient. "I didn't want to hurt your feelings." "You didn't want my presence," I corrected. His breathing shifted, frustrated, defensive, maybe a little ashamed. "So what now? You're cutting us off." "No, Wesley," I said softly. "I'm stepping out of a role that was killing me quietly." He didn't speak for several seconds. Then quieter, "I didn't think it would come to this." "You didn't think I'd ever say no," I replied. Another silence, longer this time, carrying years of everything unsaid. Finally, he hung up. I stared at the quiet room, expecting tears, but none came. What arrived instead was a calm I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and stepped onto the porch. The evening smelled of damp leaves and possibility. A brown leaf loosened from the elm tree and spiraled down, steady and graceful. It looked like a letting go. The next morning, my doorbell chimed. When I opened it, I found Mia, 23 years old, polished, impatient, wearing a coat that looked like it had walked off a runway. "Grandma," she said sharply, "Dad's upset." "I'm sure he is," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" She walked inside without answering, set her purse on the table, and crossed her arms. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Doing what?" "Cutting everyone out. Freezing money. Changing documents. Acting like you're alone in the world." "I'm reclaiming space," I said. "That sounds like something from one of my college classes," she scoffed. "It's something from my life," I answered. "So you're just done?" she asked. "No, sweetheart. I'm just beginning." She frowned, confused in that youthful way that assumes loss is reversible and people are elastic. "You're being selfish." "I've been selfless for 50 years, I said. "Maybe it's time to balance the scales." She grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and left without a hug, without even a backward glance. The screen door clicked behind her. But for once, I didn't chase anyone. After Mia left in a swirl of indignation and expensive perfume, the house felt strangely peaceful, like a room finally emptied of noise that had been humming for years. I decided to take a walk around the block, cane tapping a slow rhythm against the pavement. The trees were still clinging to their last colors, rusty reds, fading golds, like stubborn holdouts refusing to surrender to the chill settling in. As I passed the Lambert house, now owned by a young couple with 3 lively boys, I heard laughter spilling from their windows, sharp and bright as the crackle of firewood. For the first time in a long while, I realized how much I'd missed that sound. Not because I envied it, but because it reminded me of what genuine closeness sounded like, unforced and uncomplicated. Back home, I sat by the kitchen window with a blank notebook and a cup of weak coffee. The pen felt unfamiliar in my hand. I hadn't written anything but grocery lists in years, but as soon as it touched the paper, the words poured out. "Read." I didn't tell him about the trust changes or the bank account blocks. He would hear soon enough. Instead, I wrote about what mattered, that I loved him, that he'd always looked at me as if I were someone worth hearing. That I trusted him, not with the money, not with the house, but with my story. When I finished the letter, I folded it carefully and tucked it into an envelope. I didn't write his address. I'd give it to him when the moment felt right. Just as I stood to refill my coffee, the phone rang. I expected Wesley or Thelma again. But it was Reed. "Hi, Grandma," he said, voice hesitant in that gentle way he's had since he was small. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied. "I talked to Dad," he said quietly. "Of course you did. He's upset." "I imagine so." "He said you're cutting everyone off," Reed went on. "That you're shutting the family out." I smiled a little, a soft, tired thing. "I'm not shutting out the family. Just the ones who only remember me when they need something." He didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't want to be one of those people." "You never were," I said. Another pause. Then, "Do you want me to come over?" Not to talk about Dad. Just to come over. "Yes," I said I would. "I'll be there in 20. When Reed arrived, he was holding a bakery bag and wearing an old hoodie that made him look a decade younger. We sat at the kitchen table, quietly eating cinnamon buns and sipping tea. For a long while, the only sound was the ticking of the clock. Then he spoke. "You're not wrong, Grandma. About how they treat you." I didn't need to answer. The truth hovered in the air between us, undeniable. "They talk about you like you're a responsibility," he continued. "Like helping you is something they're forced to do." I blinked. It wasn't new information, but hearing it said aloud by someone who loved me hit differently. "You deserve better than that," he said, voice soft but firm. "I deserve what I let myself accept," I corrected. "But that changes now." He nodded slowly. Before leaving, I handed him the envelope. "Don't open it yet," I said. "Just keep it." He held it gently, as if it might crumble if handled too roughly, and nodded. After he left, the silence in the house felt lighter. Rain arrived overnight, tapping against the windows like a polite visitor. I stood at the glass, watching the world blur as the drops slid down in thin, trembling paths. Everything looked softened, like a freshly washed memory. At precisely 10, I returned to Andrew's office. Papers were neatly arranged in front of him, a pen placed at the top like a ceremonial offering. "We can finalize everything today," he said. "Your life estate is secured. Reed is the beneficiary. The accounts are locked under your signature alone." "Good," I said. "Would you like us to notify your son formally?" I thought of Wesley's clipped tone, his impatience, the way he only noticed my existence when something inconvenienced him. "No," I said. "I think silence will be message enough." I signed the documents without hesitation, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of self-preservation. When I returned home, I placed the signed copies in the fireproof box beneath my bed. Alongside them, I placed a short note addressed to myself. "You chose yourself. It's not betrayal. It's survival." Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang again. For a moment, I hoped it was Reed. But when I opened the door, it was Thelma, umbrella dripping, coat still on, expression pinched like she'd bitten a sour lemon. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. She didn't sit. She didn't even loosen her coat. Just stood by the doorway, arms crossed as if the house might offend her. "I heard about the trust," she said. "Wesley told me." "I'm sure he did." "You're being unreasonable," she announced. "I'm being clear," I replied. "You're cutting us out." I interrupted her. "I didn't cut anyone out. You stepped away. Years ago." She scowled. "All this over a birthday?" "Don't diminish it," I said, my voice low but steady. "You excluded me. And I'm done pretending otherwise." She sighed dramatically. "Wesley is worried about you." "Wesley is worried about access," I corrected. Her jaw tightened. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do," I said. For the first time in a long time. She left without another word. That night, I pulled down the box of old photographs. Dust puffed into the air as I lifted the lid. Inside were decades of my life flattened into glossy memories. George in the garden, grinning with dirt on his face. Wesley at 5, guilty grin smeared with chocolate. Me standing behind him, pretending not to notice his sneaky fingers in the cake. I spread the photos across the table like pieces of a puzzle I had stopped trying to assemble. Looking at George again, I heard his voice as clearly as if he were standing behind me. "Don't let them turn you into a wallet with a pulse." He had said it jokingly once, but the seriousness in his eyes had stayed with me. I wrote him a letter that night, words I wished I had spoken sooner. "George. They finally pushed me too far. And this time, I didn't fold. I remembered what you said. I stopped disappearing. You'd be proud." I placed the letter on top of the photos. The phone rang only once that night, but I let it go to voicemail. I was done answering to guilt. The next afternoon, I lit a candle on the windowsill, something I used to do when George traveled, not as a signal but as a reminder that light was mine to claim. Outside, the neighbors were having lunch again, windows open, voices drifting in the warm air. I watched them with a peaceful detachment, not longing, not envy, just clarity. They chose each other. My family chose convenience. Later, I swept the back porch, an old habit I had abandoned. Under the bench, I found a pair of stiff old gardening gloves. Inside one was a forgotten note from George. "Roots run deep, even when the surface looks dry." I sat down and cried, not because I felt broken, but because I finally felt real. Then I spent the rest of the day in the garden, pruning roses until my back ached and the sun dipped. And when I finally laughed, soft, unexpected, I realized something. I was coming back to myself. The next morning, I saw Wesley pull up in front of the house. He parked too quickly, tires grinding against the gravel, his old habit of arriving like a storm no matter the weather. I didn't rush to open the door. Let him knock. Twice. When I finally opened it, he was already frowning, jaw tight, eyes darting around like he expected the place to be rearranged. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "I assume that's why you're here," I replied, closing the door gently behind him. He stood in the middle of the living room, pacing the same track George once wore into the carpet during tense nights. He didn't sit. Neither did I. "You've made things incredibly complicated," he began. "With the trust. With the accounts. With the silence." "I haven't been silent," I corrected. You've simply stopped listening. He ignored that. Look, I know we've had tension. But freezing us out? That's not the solution. No, I said calmly. It's the outcome. He stopped pacing and turned to me. What does that mean? It means, I said softly, that when you ignore someone long enough, they eventually learn how to live without you. His mouth fell slightly open, but he recovered quickly. This is still about the birthday, isn't it? It's about dozens of birthdays. And holidays. And dinners I wasn't invited to. And months of silence. And years of being treated like a bank with a heartbeat. That's not fair, he snapped. You're right, I said. It isn't. And it hasn't been for a long time. He scoffed and looked around the room, as if searching for evidence to support his case. His gaze landed on the mantel, where an old photo of him as a child sat in a chipped wooden frame. He picked it up, stared, then set it down with a loud click. You sit here alone in this house, he said, watering dead plants and clinging to the past.
No, he replied quietly.
I nurture roots that still belong to me. For the first time since he'd walked in, Wesley looked shaken. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture George used to mimic playfully when Wesley was young. We needed your help, he said, voice softer now. You were part of our system. That's the problem, I said. I wasn't your mother. I was your system. He sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees. His voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. I didn't think it would come to this. You didn't think I'd ever say no. Silence stretched thin between us. Finally, he stood. I talked to Reed, he said. He told me everything. He said you're leaving the house to him. I am. You're punishing us, he said. I'm protecting myself. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. That's the whole point. I'm not asking anymore. He swallowed hard. So that's it. Yes, I said. That's it. He stared at me one last moment, confusion and anger and maybe a flicker of regret tangled in his expression. Then he left, no door slam, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet departure, the sound of a man who suddenly realized he'd misread the safety of his footing. I stayed still long after he'd gone. The house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 days later, I received a text from Thelma. 4 terse sentences. We all need to calm down. None of this is permanent. You're still part of the family even if you're upset. Let's stop punishing each other. I stared at the screen. Not an apology. Not a sliver of accountability. Just an attempt to paint my boundaries as tantrums. I didn't reply. Instead, I went into the backyard and put on my gardening gloves. Soil never lies. It doesn't manipulate or deflect. It accepts whatever work you put into it and gives back only what it can. As I knelt by the roses, I heard the side gate creak open. Grandma. I turned. Reed stood holding a paper bag, shy smile on his face. I brought sandwiches, he said. Turkey, and that fizzy drink you like. I nodded toward the porch.
Come sit.
We ate quietly, the breeze flicking at the edges of the napkins, the crows chattering in the trees like old gossips. After a while, Reed sighed. Dad's spiraling. I expected he might. He thinks you're trying to erase him. No, I said gently. He erased me. I'm just acknowledging the empty space. Reed winced. That's rough. Living through it was rougher. He nodded, eyes trained on the horizon. They think I'm encouraging you. I laughed, an honest, warm sound I hadn't heard from myself in a while. Sweetheart, you still can't fold a fitted sheet. What power do you think you have over me? He smiled a little, but his jaw remained tense. They don't recognize this version of you. That's all right, I said. I'm just getting to know her myself. We stayed outside until the sun retreated behind the fence. The light made the garden glow like embers. Before leaving, Reed turned back. I opened your letter, he said. I waited. It made me cry, he admitted. But it felt good. Like the truth finally got some air. I hugged him, a long, steady embrace that said everything words couldn't. Later, when the house was quiet again, I checked my phone. Still no reply from Thelma. Good. The next morning, Dorothy showed up. She didn't knock, just slipped through the side gate like she had 1,000 times before and tapped on the glass. You took your time coming around, she said as she stepped inside, her tone half affection, half triumph. She handed me a warm paper bag. Scones. We sat at the table, breaking them open, spreading soft butter like we had done every Saturday for decades. Well, she said finally. You did it. Cut them loose. I cut the chains they wrapped me in, I corrected. They were the ones who cut me loose years ago. Dorothy leaned back, nodding slowly. How's it feel? Scary, I admitted. And strangely right. She smiled. Reclaiming yourself always feels like wearing shoes you forgot you owned. We sat in companionable silence. Before leaving, she squeezed my hand. You didn't say no to them, Joan. You said yes to you. Her words stayed with me long after she left. Later that afternoon, I sat on the porch and let the quiet settle around me. My world wasn't smaller. It was clearer. In the kitchen drawer, I found a small note Dorothy had slipped in. Proud of you. Proud like rain loves the roof it lands on. Welcome home to yourself. That night, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. The next morning, Reed knocked again, gentle, steady, familiar. He carried a cardboard box he'd found in the garage. I think you'll want these, he said. Inside were George's old binoculars, a stack of my handwritten recipe cards, a broken music box Wesley once adored, and a leather-bound album I didn't remember owning. Reed handed it to me like it was treasure. They almost threw it out, he said quietly. I looked up. Who? He hesitated. Dad. And Thelma. I said nothing. Just opened the album. Inside were photos from before Reed was born. George fishing, Wesley splashing in the lake, me holding a sandwich and laughing at something I no longer recalled. Reed's voice softened.
I'm sorry, Grandma.
I took his hand. You owe me nothing, I said. But you have given me something very real. What's that? He asked. You showed up. Outside, rain tapped gently on the roof, steady and kind. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. After Reed left that day, the house felt different, not louder, not fuller, but somehow steadier. As though some old sagging beam inside me had finally been reinforced. I moved through the room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, straightening small objects, grounding myself in a way I hadn't done in years. It had been a long time since I'd done anything purely because it brought me joy. So I changed that. The next morning, I put on my good coat, the navy one with the neat stitching, and brushed my hair. Added a touch of lipstick, not for anyone else, but because I liked the way it made me feel assembled. Whole. I walked to the cafe on Oak Street, the little one with the chip tables and the old upright piano that no one played anymore. For years, I had passed it on errands, always telling myself I'd stop in next time. There is no next time unless you make it, I realized. Inside, the place smelled of roasted beans and lemon zest. A young man with a nose ring smiled at me. What can I get for you today? A slice of lemon loaf, I said. And coffee. Black. He rang me up without blinking at the cash I handed him, another small relief. I found a spot by the window and watched people drift by. 2 teenagers sharing earbuds. A woman pushing a stroller. An older gentleman walking a dog who seemed to know every tree by name. I ate slowly. Savored every bright, citrusy bite. I couldn't remember the last time something tasted so clean, so unapologetically simple. A few days later, I went to the community theater alone. Steel Magnolias was playing. I used to love theater, but somewhere along the years, I convinced myself it was indulgent to attend alone. That enjoyment needed company. But that night, I realized that my presence, was company enough. I wore my mother's brooch, sat in the 3rd row, and let the lights dim around me. For 2 hours, I didn't think about money or trust documents or who had stopped calling. I just allowed myself to exist in the dark, held by a story that wasn't mine but felt familiar in its ache. During intermission, a woman beside me whispered, "You're here alone?" "Yes," I said. She nodded in admiration. "Good for you. I wish I had the courage." I smiled. It's not courage. It's clarity. After the final bow, I clapped until my hands stung. Not just for the actors, for myself, for showing up, for reclaiming a small forgotten piece of who I once was. The walk home was gentle, the night cool and quiet. I took the long way, passing old landmarks from earlier chapters of my life. The bookstore George loved. The lot where Wesley broke his arm. The elm tree whose branches once held a tire swing for a boy who no longer remembered the feeling of flight. When I returned home, I sat in the dark with a glass of water and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. There's a difference, and I felt it for the first time in decades. The next morning I wrote a letter, not out of bitterness or desire for reconciliation, but because honesty is a kind of closure. Wesley, you don't owe me love. But I don't owe you silence. For years, I thought motherhood meant unconditional availability, being ready to help, forgive, finance, support, repeat. I believed that the more I gave, the safer our connection would be. It wasn't. You made choices. Many of them. You chose to distance yourself, except when my wallet was involved. You chose to let my presence fade from your life while still reaching for my resources. That isn't love. That's extraction. So I made a choice too. I chose to stop disappearing. Not in anger, but in necessity. The woman who never said no is gone. The one who remains is learning to live on her own terms. I don't need your apology. I don't need your permission. I don't need your understanding. I just need peace. And that is what I'm taking back. Joan ***. I folded it neatly and placed it inside a drawer, unmailed. Sometimes the act of speaking matters more than being heard. Later, I stepped outside with a blanket and tea and sat in the quiet of the backyard. The roses were blooming late that season, stubborn little bursts of color defying the calendar. I admired them for their resilience, for their refusal to wither simply because someone expected them to. I watched the wind weave through the branches. Not hurried. Not violent. Just steady. And I thought, I have no more arguments to win. No more dinners to beg for. No more calls to hope for. What I have now is a name, a home, a heartbeat. And myself. Finally, myself. Morning came again. Light spilled across the kitchen in thin gold stripes. I moved slowly, not from age, but from intention. I brewed tea, set out my chipped mug, sat at the table like someone preparing for a meeting with her own life. Halfway through my crossword, I heard a knock at the side door. Only people who truly know you use the kitchen entrance. I opened it. It was Reed. No box this time, no agenda. Just him. I was walking by, he said. Thought I'd see if you were up. I'm always up, I said. Come in. He poured himself a cup of tea without asking. That's how you know someone belongs. They don't need permission to be comfortable. We talked about nothing important at first. The neighbor's new dog. The bakery that closed. The strange way birds seem to know winter before we do. Then he asked, do you miss them? I didn't lie. Sometimes. Would you take them back? Not the way they were, I said. Not if the price is erasing myself. He nodded. Dad thinks you'll come around. I did come around, I said with a small smile. Just not in the direction he expected. He laughed, not loudly, but in that warm way that says he sees me clearly. He hugged me before leaving, kissed my cheek and said, see you soon. And I believed him. When the door closed, I sat again at the table. The sun had risen fully now. The tea was still warm. The silence felt like a companion instead of an enemy. They closed their doors to me. That much is true. But I opened one, finally, for myself. And beyond it, I found space. I found calm. I found clarity. I found me. So if you, whoever is reading this, have been waiting for a sign, to speak up, to draw a boundary, to stop shrinking yourself just to keep the peace, let this be it. You are not selfish. You are remembering. You are allowed to return to yourself. And if this story tugged at something quiet and brave inside you, don't keep it hidden. Share it. Say it out loud. Let someone else know they aren't alone.